I was dozing in the late-day sun, stretched across the armchair in my den, a half-finished glass of iced water on the stand beside me, and the low whir of the air conditioner humming through the vents. There's something about these still hours after lunch that feels like a suspended breath, a small haven in a week otherwise full of motion. My home is often quiet, the sort of quiet that lets your thoughts wander without boundaries. Until today, when a knock came at the door. It was one of those soft, uncertain knocks that makes you stop and consider who could be on the other side. I wasn't anticipating visitors, not at that time. My mind went first to a delivery person or a neighbor asking for a small favor. But when I opened the door, I found Leo, my neighbor's son, standing there, one hand resting lightly on his bicycle, as though the ride had been longer than expected. Leo is in his late 20s, usually wearing an easy grin that puts people at ease, but he's not one to stop for more than a passing greeting. "Hello, I hope this isn't a bad time," he said, his tone carrying a slight waver, a thread of something unreadable woven into his words. "I wanted to ask you something." I motioned for him to enter. My interest was stirred. Typically, Leo would just offer a nod from his driveway and cycle on. This hesitation, this deliberate quiet before speaking, made me think something might be off. He stepped inside, bringing with him a faint scent of warm pavement and dry leaves from his ride. The atmosphere in the room seemed to grow denser suddenly, charged with a gentle tension that wasn't unpleasant, just out of the ordinary. He looked around as if noticing the space for the first time, the light catching the faded blues of the drapes and the patterned rug underfoot. "May I sit?" he asked, and I nodded, pointing to the stool by the window where the sun pooled like honey on the floorboards. He sat, hands resting lightly on his thighs, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. I felt a strange blend of expectation and care, a soft stirring in my chest I couldn't quite name. When he finally spoke, it was nearly under his breath. "I wanted to say I've always looked up to you," he said, and I paused. That simple statement landed like a stone dropped into quiet water, sending ripples through my mind. Looked up to me? Leo, my neighbor's son, someone I'd seen mature from a shy child into the thoughtful man now sitting across from me, looked up to me in what sense? "I mean, you're capable and considerate, and I've seen how you manage things, your days, your responsibilities. It's admirable," he added, his voice fading slightly, earnest but unsure. There was no attempt to flatter, no hidden agenda in his expression, just sincerity, plain and unanticipated. For a second, I was at a loss for words. I tend to think of myself as grounded, even private, the kind who keeps feelings carefully contained. But hearing those words in that still afternoon light, I felt something change within me, a warmth, a realization that someone had truly noticed me, not just the exterior but the quieter layers beneath. "Thank you," I finally said, surprising myself with how deeply I was touched. That means a great deal." We sat for a while, the room thick with sunlight and silence, but in the best possible way. No hurry, no pressure, just a quiet recognition of a moment neither had seen coming but both somehow welcomed. And as Leo relaxed into the stool, a slight smile touching his lips, I understood this afternoon had just shifted in a way I never could have predicted. It wasn't merely a knock at my door. It was an opening, a gentle push toward a kinship I hadn't known I was waiting for. After that first stretch of quiet, I offered Leo a glass of water. It felt like a small ceremony, the kind that allows dialogue to unfold slowly, a bridge between acquaintance and something closer. He accepted with a murmured thanks, and drank slowly, as if the coolness of the glass held more than refreshment, perhaps a little bravery too. We began by speaking of simple things, the shift in the season, the old tree out front, the way the light slanted through the window at this time of day. Leo seemed more at ease now, his posture relaxing just a bit. And then, almost without a noticeable turn, the talk deepened. "You know," he said, his voice quieter now, "I've often felt I didn't really know anyone around here. But you've always seemed different. Approachable, but not in an obvious way. Steady, I suppose. I've always respected that." I smiled, somewhat self-conscious but truly moved. Most people notice the obvious things, my home, my habits, the plants I tend to. Leo wasn't speaking of those. He was speaking of me, the person behind the daily routines, and that touched something real. "Leo," I said slowly, picking my words, It's uncommon for someone to perceive another person that way, especially someone younger noticing. Well, someone a little older, I added with a soft chuckle, the sound gentle in the space. Thank you for saying it. He shifted on the stool, pausing briefly before meeting my gaze. I didn't want it to seem strange or out of place, he said. I just needed you to know. I suppose I didn't fully understand how much until lately. I felt a flutter of something unplanned in my chest, a mix of compassion, curiosity, and that unmistakable spark of human rapport. It wasn't about age or about assumptions. It was about truth, about feeling recognized in a way that resonates. We began to share more about ourselves, things not typically shared with casual neighbors. I told him about the trials of navigating family life, balancing commitments, the small triumphs that often go unseen. He listened, truly listened, leaning forward as if taking in each word, nodding at parts that seemed to strike a chord. And then he shared about his own path, the stress of his career, the solitude of relocating from his hometown, the times he felt no one truly grasped him. His voice held a vulnerability I hadn't anticipated, so distinct from the cheerful, polite young man I'd greeted so many times before. There was a pause, a shared breath between us, as the gold of afternoon began to soften toward dusk. For a moment I recognized how rare it is to connect like this, to have an exchange that feels like it comes from the core rather than the surface. I feel like I can really talk to you, he said softly, almost testing the words. Like I can actually be honest. I nodded, offering a gentle smile. And I feel the same, Leo. It's nice, isn't it, to be heard without needing to justify everything first. He smiled, and it wasn't the casual smile of a neighbor. It was a smile that held thankfulness, trust, and something tenderly unspoken between us. In that moment, I understood that this meeting, this unplanned call, had altered something in each of us. The sun dipped behind the rooftops, stretching long shadows over the den floor. We didn't speak for a time, simply sitting together in the quiet, sharing the solace of company. I felt a warmth I hadn't expected to feel with someone nearer to my own children's age. And yet, it felt completely natural, completely true. Leo's visit, which had begun as a simple knock, had become an entrance to something I hadn't foreseen, an emotional closeness built on sincerity, regard, and the subtle thrill of finding someone who truly perceives you. I watched him rise at last, getting ready to go, and I knew I was already anticipating the next conversation, to nurturing this bond in ways that felt secure and genuine. That evening left me with a lingering, pensive feeling. Sometimes the most unforeseen knocks on your door can open the widest chambers in your heart. A few days drifted by after Leo's visit, but I couldn't dislodge the memory of that afternoon. It was peculiar, like a strand had been tugged, and now a part of me was waiting patiently to see if he would return. I told myself it was mere interest, or perhaps solitude, but the reality was more layered. There was a warmth I hadn't known in years, something tender and vivid, kindled by a straightforward act of sincerity. Then, one late afternoon, I heard the familiar, tentative knock again. My heart gave a little leap that took me by surprise, and I found myself smiling before I'd even turned the handle. Leo stood there, bicycle propped against the siding, a gentle uncertainty in his stance that made him all the more likable. "Hi," he said, his voice even softer now, slightly anxious. "I was wondering if you're not busy, maybe we could talk again." I moved aside, welcoming him in, noting how the dwindling light fell across his face in gentle bands of gold. There was a different quality to the air this time. He seemed more exposed, and in turn it made me feel both protective and receptive in ways I hadn't anticipated. We settled in the den again, and for a while we didn't speak, letting the silence lie comfortably between us. Then he turned to me, and I could see the burden he'd been holding behind his eyes. "I've been thinking about what I said the other day," he started cautiously, "and I don't know how to put it. I feel like I've found someone who actually gets me, even a little, and I'm afraid of ruining it." I reached out, placing a hand lightly on his arm. "Leo, none of this needs to be perfect. It's just two people being real with each other. That's plenty." His shoulders relaxed, a soft sigh escaping as if he'd been holding his breath for days. And then, slowly, the conversation deepened, moving past admiration and interest into something more personal. We spoke of our anxieties, our disappointments, our quiet aspirations. I shared tales from my earlier days, the errors that formed me, the insights that still steer me. He listened, and then when it was his turn, he shared things I hadn't known. The quiet instances of isolation, the strain to always seem resilient, the longing for someone to simply see him without critique. There was an intimacy to the dialogue that neither of us engineered, but that developed naturally. It wasn't about proximity, it was about feeling safe enough to be perceived, truly perceived by another person. And yet I sensed a delicate tension, a pull that hung in the air. Every look, every slight movement seemed heightened in the amber glow filling the room. At one point he reached for my hand again, hesitating, as if asking for consent. I didn't draw back. Instead, I gave his hand a slight, reassuring press. That single gesture conveyed what words could not, the acknowledgement of our connection, the agreement, the faith. We sat like that for a long while, hands lightly touching, eyes meeting in silent understanding. The sun had sunk lower now, washing the walls in deep copper, and I felt a wave of gratitude for the honesty, for the shared vulnerability, for the unexpected depth of this bond. When he finally rose to leave, he lingered at the door. "Thank you," he said simply, "for listening, for being here. It means more than I can express." I smiled, feeling a quiet, glowing warmth in my chest. "And thank you, Leo, for trusting me." As I closed the door behind him, I leaned against it for a moment, thinking about how unpredictable and lovely life could be. A gentle knock, a quiet admission, and suddenly the world seemed broader, richer, more vivid. I realized that this connection, unforeseen, mutual, and deeply felt, wasn't just about him or me. It was about learning that even at this point in life, we could still be seen, still be understood, and still be touched by someone else in ways we never saw coming. I returned to the armchair, allowing the quiet to envelop me, feeling a sense of expansion and hope. The evening sky outside was melting into soft hues of rose and lilac, and I understood I was open to seeing where this time might go, not from recklessness, but from interest, trust, and the readiness to welcome new passages in life. After that evening with Leo, I observed a subtle change within myself. Life had long been a sequence of routines, modest comforts, and expected patterns. But now there was a new alertness, a quiet eagerness in the everyday. I found myself anticipating our talks, to the soft knock that signified more than just a social call. A week later, he came by again. This time there was a fluidity to him, a quiet assurance that came from knowing he had been accepted. We sat in the den, the late-day light spreading across the rug, and I recognized how natural it had become. Our discussions, our quiet moments, our small acts of faith. "I've been reflecting a lot," he said, his voice soft but clear, "about how unusual it is to connect with someone like this, to feel seen and accepted without having to clarify every detail." I nodded, knowing precisely what he meant. "It is unusual," I agreed, "and it's something you cherish carefully when it occurs." There was a shared pause where nothing needed to be said. I felt a profound sense of thankfulness, thankful that life had offered this unforeseen bond, that we had been willing enough to accept it, that age and situation hadn't been barriers. We spoke of lighter things too, books, strolls through the area, the way the late light touches the backyard. And yet beneath the casual topics, there was a stratum of understanding, an intimacy born from mutual respect and candor. It was clear this bond was not temporary. It was a slow, gentle unfurling, one that asked for patience and attention. At one point, Leo reached across the side table and lightly touched my hand. This time, the gesture held the weight of familiarity and trust, not the tentativeness of before. I smiled, letting our hands rest together, feeling a warmth that went beyond physical contact. It was connection, affirmation, and solace all at once. "I never expected this," he said quietly. "Not with you, not like this." "Neither did I admitted, the edges of my mouth lifting in a gentle smile. "But I'm grateful it did." As evening settled, the room bathed in soft copper light, I felt a mood of contemplation wrapping around me. This connection, unforeseen, mutual, deeply emotional, had taught me something priceless, that it's never too late to be seen, to be understood, and to share yourself with someone in a meaningful way. And in return, it's never too late to witness the courage and sincerity of another person. When he finally left that night, I didn't feel the hollow ache that sometimes follows partings. Instead, I felt calm, content, and quietly eager for what lay ahead. Life, I understood, still held surprises for me. Instances of laughter, shared quiet, and heartfelt exchanges that could touch the spirit. As I closed the door behind him and leaned against it, I gazed out at the stars beginning to glimmer above the peaceful neighborhood. The world felt larger somehow, richer, full of potentials I hadn't considered. And in the quiet that followed, I knew that this simple knock at my door had transformed me, not in loud ways, but in the way that counts most, by opening my heart to connection, respect, and the unexpected joy of being perceived. I poured myself another glass of water, settled back into my favorite chair, and smiled softly to myself. Life had reminded me that even in the later stretches, there is space for discovery, for tenderness, and for the quiet, lovely moments that leave a lasting imprint on the heart. And for the first time in a long while, I felt completely, wonderfully present.